The second of four objectives is what measures are in place to monitor performance. Well, what has been reported in the different media articles that I saw, and this is what a lot of folks really kind of picked up on, is that the Border Patrol performance measures, let's just say, can be improved. We can go over that in just a second. And that the data sources being used are imperfect. That's true. I do want to mention one thing, though, and I really don't like to use sports analogies because you almost turn off half the audience when you do that. But if you think about the way a football team organizes, they don't put everybody on the line of scrimmage. You have people on the line of scrimmage, which is, I guess, akin to the people at the ports of entry and the Border Patrol at the fence line. You have linebackers. The reason you have linebackers is you can't count on the line making all the tackles. The checkpoints you might think of as the linebackers. And then you have the defensive backs, and that could be verify, it could be interior enforcement. We are sort of in an enforcement-only mode right now. Until comprehensive reform comes, we're going to be facing these challenges. But if you think about what these different layers do, if you think about it in that context, then the performance measurement is important. But what performance measurement tells you, not that you don't need linebackers, you're going to need a linebacker somehow. What performance measurement tells you is that linebacker performing to expectations? Is that linebacker performing as well as the linebacker on the other team? Or performing as well as his partner down the road? So when we talk about there being lapses in performance measurement, it's true, and it's important, and it needs to be fixed. But we need to consider it, and it does not mean that because the performance measurement is lacking or limited, that then they can't show that these are effective in any sense. So there were three checkpoint measures that we see here. And the problem with these measures is they talk about activity. How many seizures, how many apprehensions, how many referrals. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you relative to what. If you seize 1,000 pounds of cocaine, that's good. But what the measures don't speak to is, did 3,000 get through? At the ports of entry, the federal goal is to detect and apprehend 30% of major illegal activity. And this shows the need for a three-tiered strategy. So you're really only getting 1 in 4. It's important to get that 1,000, but it's also important to see what you're not getting so you can recalibrate your efforts to get something. We also found that there were some errors in how these performance data that were collected were reported. In some instances, some of the Tucson information, for example, wasn't reported by Washington in their overall performance and accountability report. In other instances, the data were inconsistently gathered and from sector to sector, location to location, which made the data that were collected less meaningful. There wasn't really good guidance from headquarters on what needs to be collected, how, and how it's to be reported. And there wasn't adequate oversight to make sure that this data were collected properly and reported consistently. We made recommendations along these lines, and the Border Patrol is in the process of implementing them. Next slide. So this is an objective I'm sure you're very interested in, and that's community impact. Well, first let's talk about the Border Patrol process in general. What the Border Patrol looks to do is to maximize operational effectiveness, and that translates into putting a checkpoint in a location that makes sense and designing it in a way that makes sense. And what makes sense, what the criteria are, is you have good visibility, it's on a major road, there aren't roads that could easily be used to circumvent the checkpoint and so on. And secondly, the Border Patrol looks to minimize adverse impacts on the public and the surrounding communities. And that includes public safety, it includes traffic flows, it includes trying to, if there are going to be circumventions, to get the circumventions out to remote areas, not to areas where there are schools, hospitals, businesses, residents, or other inhabited locations. We looked at 3 checkpoints, you see on the next slide, that were constructed since 2006. These were all in Texas, all in the El Paso sector or the one in Laredo. 3 in El Paso, or 2 in El Paso, 1 in Laredo. And we found that, generally speaking, the construction, placement, and design of these checkpoints all complied with the Border Patrol's criteria. And I might add that the criteria that they established for these were not unreasonable. We also found that the plans for the I-19 checkpoint also aligned with their criteria to keep the checkpoint away from populated areas, schools, hospitals, and other areas. In doing our work, I want to stress that we looked at each one of these 4 locations that were proposed. And if you go to the next slide, we looked at each one of these locations, but not only those locations, because we weren't satisfied that there weren't any other locations that were possible. So on more than one occasion, we had the Border Patrol drive us up and down I-19. And as we went up and down, we said, why not that location? What about this location? Why doesn't that fit? Doesn't seem to be a lot of people around here. And we did this on more than one occasion so that, it wouldn't depend on who you were riding with as to what the answer. And we found that every one of the other locations had a problem. Either it was close to a school or a hospital, or it was too close to a road that could easily use a circumvent. Anyway, these 4 were probably the best of the possibilities. In taking a closer look at these, we independently looked to see exactly if it met the criteria. And here you see what we found. The estimated population living within 1 mile at the different locations, the estimated population living within 5 miles, nearest distance from a hospital, approximate distance nearest the schools. So we went through all the criteria independently, and this is what we found. Now, if you look at the data, it looks like, well, maybe KP42 might be a little bit better by virtue of the estimated population living within 5 miles. There's about 150 more people or so. But the problem with KP42, I believe, was construction costs. You had the bridge, the overpass right there, you had the frontage road, and it would have required an awful lot of regrading to take hills out. The cost was far higher at KP42 than 41. We also looked at the design guidelines and processes. And the factors there were to have operational effectiveness, safety and comfort of agents and canines, safety and convenience of the traveling public, aesthetics to blend into the area, buildings and features. There's a degree of discretion involved in the design here. And Chief Gilbert has some of that discretion. I believe he's using some of that discretion because the plans have changed from the first time we've seen them. But these have to be designed to work as well as they can in the locations that they're meant to be in. The size of these checkpoints, if you go to the next slide, is basically a function of the number of inspection lanes you have. The current plans, we'll get into in a minute, for the one at KP19 is larger than the one at I-35 because of projected traffic and projected wait times. Let me go to the next slide, maybe we can move along. Let's go to the table. There you go. Right now, the planned I-19 checkpoint is going to surpass the I-35 checkpoint in acreage. If you peel away some of the acreage that is devoted to a longer on and off ramp, which was dictated by the Arizona Department of Transportation, I believe, and if you peel away some of the septic tanks and you get down to a much smaller footprint for the inspection area. But still, what drives the size is the number of lanes. As you can see, the inspection lanes through the 4th column over, they project 8. They need 5 now. They project that in 2017 they'll need 8. If they go to 7, for example, in 2017, the projection is the wait time goes from 2 minutes to 20 minutes at peak time. So if you're coming from Nogales heading to Tucson, and you're looking to get through in a rather expeditious fashion, you would need to have the lanes and the staff to move you through. At the ports of entry, the federal goal is to detect and apprehend 30% of major illegal activity. And this shows the need for a 3-tiered strategy.